Hey everyone, welcome back to FPL Fran. Today's video is going to be my Game Week 17 team selection. It's a pretty interesting game week because I've already made quite aggressive moves for Game Week 16. Game Week 16 is still going. I'm recording this video, I think whilst Brentford versus Leeds is being played. I'm still watching the game right now on the side. And Dango's just been called offside for a potential penalty that, would have been a Thiago penalty. Regardless, though, I think I just wanted to jump into my transfer plans because the video catalog has to keep going, and I don't think the United versus Bournemouth game, unless of course there's a massive injury towards Semenyo or Bruno, is going to have a huge impact on my transfer plans. The key thing being that I did sort of jump the gun in terms of selling Mbumo. I might live to regret the decision, but I just think with a little bit of uncertainty over AFCON, I decided to make the move. So you can kind of have a look at my team here. Guys, to subscribe if you've been enjoying the content as of late. Around 50% of viewers aren't subscribed, so if you're enjoying the content and, for example, you love the cheat sheet series, please do subscribe, like the video, drop a comment as well with what your transfer plans are. I'll be happy to respond this week as well, and thank you guys so much for supporting. So we're on 60 points. That kind of keeps us within, I think, a gray area right now. We're still in the top 10K. Hopefully, I think with 2 players left to go, and no threats really within this match, unless I guess Dango goes absolutely nuclear. We have a good game week here, and things are looking pretty dandy. Unfortunately, O'Reilly was very close towards 10 DEFCON. But yeah, there was some pretty jammy clean sheets this week, specifically from Liverpool and City. I think both teams did not really deserve their clean sheets. Both Brighton and Crystal Palace had plenty of great chances to score. Diego Gomez, for example, for Brighton, Yeremy Pino for Crystal Palace. And yeah, I mean, no need to sort of overreact to that. That will happen from time to time. And you see the flip side of the outcome as well with, let's say, double Arsenal losing the clean sheet from that one, Tolu shot. And fair play to Wolves. I don't think Arsenal played well at all within that match, and we'll react to that too. But I think the biggest thing I wanted to react to was almost Anderson and how bad Fulham have been. It's almost changed my thoughts in terms of how I'd like to approach Game Week 17. A few weeks ago, I did say that they were looking like a very good defense, and to be quite honest, they just simply haven't lived up to that whatsoever within the last few game weeks. They've actually been extremely poor as a side. And I have really no faith in them in the short term, because they'll also be a team that struggles with a lot of the AFCON transfers going out, right? If you think about a lot of the teams impacted in the short term now, I think Everton are one of them. Just because with Dewsbury Hall being injured and then 2 of their key players going to AFCON, they're going to struggle. A team like Fulham will struggle. Sunderland, I think, have a little bit more depth in terms of those areas, and I think maybe they won't struggle as much as people have been suggesting, just because the players that are going for them are probably not as key as some of the players that I've mentioned for the other teams. So that's something that we just want to kind of revisit. But yeah, I mean, we've just come off a pretty interesting game week in terms of how we can recontextualize some of the teams. I think the moves that I made anyways, just to kind of reset the tempo for Game Week 16, was actually going from Virgil van Dijk to Hincapié. The reason why I did this is because I still think that Palace defense is really good. Watching the City match, I don't think much has changed. I was pretty confident that the Munoz injury was not going to impact Palace, and I think watching the City game, it really hasn't. It is the offense, of course, that will suffer from losing such a smart, brilliant player on the attack. And Klein, clearly, I think, he like when you watch the match and when you watch a team like, let's say, Crystal Palace play, I think Sarr is going to be a big miss because he is a huge threat on the right, and now you almost have no threat on the right going forwards unless you plan to play, let's say, I guess, Nketiah at right attacking mid, which has been utilized before. But I think Sarr is just much more comfortable operating from that position, and now with Klein playing there, you just don't have the threat of, let's say, sort of Munoz being almost a right winger at times in the system. But yeah, going back to the sort of overarching point, that was the first transfer I did. I then did Mbumo out and Dewsbury Hall out to Semenyo and Szoboszlai. Now, the biggest thing is Szoboszlai seemingly has an ankle injury. I believe Slot's exact words on the injury was that he went into the back, saw Szoboszlai, and said that it wasn't looking good. But then he mentioned that Szobo is kind of like a superhuman, and we'll see how he recovers. What I will say on Szoboszlai, I think, is it really is, something to look at more from a fixtures perspective, right? So if I look at someone like Szobo, yes, of course, he's got the 4 yellow card suspension threat, but the reason why I felt comfortable going for him was I think actually having the auto subs that I have, which was the Crystal Palace defenders over, let's say, Game Week 17 and 18, I wouldn't feel too bad if worst case scenario, he obviously gets suspended for those matches. Now, we're almost dealing with a circumstance here where I think the only world where I sell Szoboszlai in Game Week 17 is if I'm absolutely certain that he's out for Game Week 18. That means Wolves at home because he's a very, very good pick if he just misses out Tottenham away, and maybe the ankle injury means that he comes back for Wolves at home. So that's kind of what I'm eyeing up for, right? Just waiting for news on Szoboszlai because I think he's the key towards whether I make transfers or not. But generally speaking, as I said, if he misses Tottenham away, I don't think that's an impact to my team, and we can walk through that in a moment. There are other interesting midfielders, right? Like maybe Sade, Minte as well. I can't go to Sade with 0 free transfers, so that's why he's not so interesting for me this game week. But actually, Minte, could be an option if we think Sobo's out for a long time. And I'd like to jump back into someone like Minte, who I just haven't had the opportunity to sort of revisit this season, but has always been sort of high in my estimation, the cheat sheet, and finally had a good performance, right? After a couple very subdued games, that Liverpool game was probably some sort of bright spark in what has been a pretty poor sort of Brighton run of performances from the attacking point of view. So yeah, that's just a note on Szoboszlai. I think it is just purely what the timeline is and where exactly we think he's going to come back, because Wolves at home is one of the best fixtures in the league. I know we just had Wolves at home with, let's say, our Arsenal players, and it was not sort of the cream of the crop fixture that we were sort of looking at when you kind of look at, let's say, United and sort of reevaluate how good that Arsenal fixture was. But that's that. In terms of Haaland, he obviously outscored Saka captain, but I don't feel too bad about the decision. I think Saka had a really good game. I think Haaland had a pretty quiet game, to be honest, but got a penalty in the end. But it shows you how fine the margins are in a game like FPL, where, to be quite honest, if you watch the Savinho chance and see him draw the penalty, that's O'Reilly giving him the one-on-one opportunity. So that could have been, let's say, if Savinho decides to take a shot there and maybe shoots and scores, that could have been a Savinho goal, O'Reilly assist, versus what eventually just became a Haaland goal. At the time when Haaland didn't score the penalty, he was only on 2 bonus, so it was looking like Saka captaincy was going to win. Do I feel bad about going against Haaland captaincy because of the outcome? No, I think, as I said, I'm very comfortable with the decision, and on another day, one different touch in football can just make the difference. And here, of course, with O'Reilly not getting the assist and not getting 10 DEFCONs as opposed to 9, that just changes the points outcome for this week. But we're still in a good spot here. And as I said, we still have Semenyo and Bruno to play, so I can't really see how I'm going to, I guess, end up with a red arrow, but things can happen, and let's see. Because you can score own goals, which Ultimate has shown. In terms of recapping, let's say, the actual game itself, and the fixtures that we've had up until so far, which includes me watching I think half of Brentford versus Leeds. Chelsea and Everton was, I think, just a game that you sort of expected, where Chelsea were likely to do well. However, they didn't have Caicedo, so maybe there was some narrative. Obviously, I think I was drawn into the narratives of Chelsea playing rather poor recently, but they had a very controlled performance. Palmer had a great goal. And I think the main thing with Palmer is unfortunately just the minutes. The reason why he was not on my free hit 16 draft when I was sort of suggesting it towards other managers was simply because the Enzo Maresca press conference comments were just not positive on Palmer. There's still mentions of, how after completing training sessions, he's still feeling, not 100% with his groin. And there's clearly some sort of pain here that I think, needs almost an entire summer to sort of be addressed. So for me, the Palmer timeline is more so maybe around game week 22. And I know that's very, very far out. We'll just talk about that in a moment. But that's where I sort of think about Saka to Palmer as a sort of move. Right now, I just don't think I really have the option to go into Chelsea options. I think the Chelsea fixtures are also pretty poor after this game week. This was the banker. This was the great game for free at 16 if people wanted to consider it. But I feel comfortable not owning Chelsea assets now, even though they've been incredible, right? Players like Chalobah, I think he's the best defender of the game right now. And that's going to happen in FPL, where you just can't own everyone who's good, if that makes sense, or it might not fit your team for whatever reason. With Liverpool-Brighton, as I said, I think it was quite similar to the City game, where if you look at the Liverpool and City scorelines, it obviously looks like they kind of dominated those games, but I really think that was a game of moments. Obviously, Liverpool could have themselves, got 3-0 up at the end of the game too, with Salah sort of wasting a complete 3-on-2 opportunity, but Brighton had their chances. And if we want to recontextualize this sort of Liverpool team without Salah, I still think the defense has not been that good, right? We did see the collapse versus Leeds. Salah was not on the pitch. And versus Brighton, I think generally speaking, Brighton had a lot of chances over that match. So the small sample size of, let's say, Liverpool playing without Salah hasn't been as good as people think or have tried to sort of illustrate with regards to defense. Burnley versus Fulham, as I said, was actually just shocking in terms of how bad Fulham were. They conceded a lot of chances. I think Leno probably bailed them out in that game, and so did Harry Wilson. I could probably say I also missed in terms of the Harry Wilson pick. There's obviously a lot of upside that a lot of people have gone to, but that is the Burnley game gone. That is the best fixture possible. I think Fulham are still a pretty poor side altogether. Smith Rowe has looked pretty good too, but Raul was quite shocking. And yeah, I think, yes, of course, Fulham have two good fixtures left coming, but I'm probably not that interested in moving to Harry Wilson, but congratulations to anyone who's actually gotten into him. He looks like a great pick. And to be fair, when you look at the season, I think as long as you're sort of loosely involved within attacking opportunities and you're actually a set piece taker, there's a lot of potential holes, right? Dewsbury Hall is someone within that mold. Anton Stack is someone within that mold. And we've seen, Granit Xhaka have holes. Enzo Lefebvre, more a penalty taker, but these types of players who just have some of these intangibles in terms of taking set pieces, in terms of taking corners, you can get yourself that sort of nuclear hull on any single match. And obviously Wilson's on an extremely hot run of form. The underlyings aren't that pretty. But as I said, I think that the main thing with Fulham I see is that they still have two more games. Am I that interested in going for those two games? Possibly not, but maybe that's an error from my part, and I'm happy to sort of miss that. But as I said, for anyone who owns Wilson, you just enjoy the next two fixtures, and then maybe just recontextualize, whether you want him in the future, because there might be other opportunities to move into other picks. With Arsenal, I think this was their worst performance. Most people saw that within the game. I don't think there's too much to say. At the end of the day, I think the defense wasn't that bad, but of course, I think it's just the intensity that's just not there, right? So yes, of course, they only conceded that one shot in reality, but it's more like even at the start of the season when we were talking about the kind of shot numbers that they were conceding, I don't think the intensity was quite there. But they do have a free midweek, and maybe the Arsenal of the first half of the season, the first quarter of the season will come back. And I think I don't have too much worry on Arsenal because they're still so far ahead when it comes to underlyings. It's just a case of, for other people who, let's say, haven't gone into triple Arsenal, there's really no reason to revisit that now. Unless you're super confident, let's say, their ability to hold up some of their underlying stats over the fixture run ahead, which is just simply worse, right? Wolves at home is gone. You don't have to care so much about a team like Arsenal. It's just, if you do think, for example, someone like Calafiori is nailed or Gabriel is nailed, maybe there's an opportunity to sort of bring these players back into the fray. And I think Calafiori, of course, is very sensible from that perspective, either on 16 or I'm sorry, not 16, but rather 17 or 18, right, as transfers in. Especially since you can also see that Arteta doesn't really have too much confidence in Miles Lewis-Skelly. We saw Hincapie actually play at the left-back position. And touching back onto Hincapie, for example, I'm an owner, and I feel like this game shows you the kind of beauty of FPL in a sense where I think the Hincapie transfer probably for me was a little too short-sighted and it didn't work out, whereas the Sobo transfer was probably a bit more of a long-term move and it didn't work out because Sobo seemingly now has an injury. Whereas the Hincapie, we've benefited from, I think, Arteta unfortunately running Ben White into the ground, which also means that now Hincapie has a very easy opportunity to just simply play, because I think Calafiori is going to be prioritized in that left-back position, which should mean that Hincapie keeps his position as left center-back. And that's sort of how I feel lucky, as I said, in a sense with Hincapie. And Sobo, yeah, I mean, the Gomez injury just meant that he had to play right back, which just almost nuked the opportunities for him to get, potential points within that match, because outside of DEFCON, it's not exactly a great position. Sure, Gomez got an assist from that position, but you'd rather have Sobo in a midfield role. And on top of that, too, Salah came on the field, which took away penalty share from someone like Szoboszlai, which was part of the reason why we brought him in for this game week. But going forward, Salah's at AFCON anyways, and we might still be able to get some of that penalty share back, especially with Ekitike playing so well, and maybe, let's say, Isak still probably struggling, generally speaking. So that's kind of how I feel about this game week. Now, there's United and Bournemouth to go. I don't think that game is going to radically change my opinion on both of these teams. I think for the most part, United still have an amazing fixture run to go, and we probably want to actually still be reinvested into a team like United. There is a consideration for me to even consider some of the defensive picks, like maybe Adalo, just because if he is nailed, he is a part of the attack, as the fullbacks are in the system. We've seen Ahmad thrive. We've also seen Dalot get some returns as of late. And if he is nailed, then I think he's actually a pretty interesting pick. For Bournemouth, I'm just banking on Bournemouth versus Burnley, which is just going to be next game week here, where I did go for that Semenyo move, pretty much wanting to bank in, as I said, that Burnley match. And that is sort of the beauty of the AFCON transfers, where you can attack some fixtures in the short term. You won't get everyone. You won't capture every hole. You won't even know where the holes are going to come from. But I think putting yourself in a position to try and get some of these short-term holes is one of the benefits of having the security blanket of having so many free transfers. So it can work out. It also might not. And that's just the game as it is. I do want to mention that for next game week, I feel like a lot of the transfers will be spent if you don't have Triple City and going to Triple City. Other than that, I don't think there's anything too interesting. Game week 18 for me is an interesting opportunity to revisit United. I don't think Newcastle at home is a particularly tough fixture for United. I think that could be an opportunity to reinvest into a team like United. Not necessarily from the defensive point of view, I would say, but it's still a pretty good game. Other than that, I think 19 is where you would think that the United fixture truly starts, because this is where they have basically, once again, one of the best fixtures in the season. They've already played Wolves away and pretty much squashed them. But the key thing too, I think that we'll get from an informational standpoint is possibly on 16 with the Monday game, with the sort of uncertainty around AFCON, and 17 will be a good sort of dry run to see how this United team actually looks versus pretty capable opposition, and potentially without Mbumo and Amad Diallo on the right-hand side. I think we've seen games where we've seen, Amad not play right wing back and United have looked terrible. And with Mbumo being out, I think that's a huge miss. So the biggest question mark is going to be how this team looks without these two players, because yes, they have Cunha, Sesko, and Mount, but is that enough? I don't really know. So I would lean towards saying I'm not that interested, but because the fixtures are so good, you will have to reconsider that, I think, from a 19 perspective. For Chelsea, I feel like maybe when we want to move back into Chelsea, that's more so game week 21/22. I tend to see that Fulham away is a pretty good defensive game, like as an opportunity to keep a clean sheet. But 22, of course, is where the attacking fixture run starts for Chelsea. So in terms of when I plan to spend free transfers, I feel like 18 is an opportunity, 19 potentially if I choose to be more passive on 18. And I think this is also circled around Hincapié and the timeline of Gabriel. Because if I look at, let's say, the fixtures and the distance for Hincapié, they're not amazing, to be quite honest. But of course, with Arsenal being such a good defense, over the context of the season, I still think Brighton at home, Everton away are pretty good opportunities, right? Everton are pretty stifled as a team. This looks like a green game to me, with the strength of all the teams right now and sort of the best starting 11s. Brighton away or Brighton at home, probably not a great game. Aston Villa at home, probably not a great game either. So I think the biggest question marks are, do you want to still stay invested into Arsenal? So the biggest thing for me is on 18 or 19, if Gabriel's coming back, do I consider things like, moving Hincapié to Calafiori? Do I consider moving Hincapié to Gabriel, or actually just completely shut myself off from double Arsenal defense, which I think a lot of people will do. Some people have Yuri and Timber, and that costs a lot more than Hincapié, probably around 0.8 to 1 million more, depending on what your selling value is. And this is an opportunity, in my opinion, to sell Arsenal defense, because regardless of how good they are, these are tough fixtures and you can't really skirt around that. It's just a case of, we have seen this Arsenal team get clean sheets versus some of the toughest of oppositions. Can they do that again over this run, which is a little bit tougher than, to be fair, the run that they've already had to date? So yeah, that's kind of context. And now we can actually segue to my transfer plans for Game Week 17. So we're quickly segueing away here towards the My Team pick and rating tool from Fantasy Football Hub. This is my team in Game Week 17. I can manage it all the way up into whatever game week I want in the future. But I think the plan here is to manage my team at least up until Game Week 22, because as I said, Game Week 22 is kind of the window where I think there's going to be a huge windfall of transfers for a lot of us, because likely after 18/19, there's not too many moves to make up until Chelsea have a really good fixture run and we want to jump back into Chelsea players. Obviously, some people have Chelsea players already. I don't. So that's kind of the main difference within my team compared to some of the other managers who clearly have benefited from owning Chelsea defense and the crazy amount of clean sheets that they've gotten recently. So yeah, with Game Week 17, I think it's all about Sobo. I'm going to treat this initial transfer path as if Sobo was actually fine for Wolves at home. This might not be the case, and we'll run through a situation of what will happen if I think Sobo's not back for Game Week 18. But I feel like if I think that Sobo's fine for Game Week 18, as I said, I do plan on rolling. And the only thing that I might tweak here compared to what the sort of AI team tool is suggesting is to actually just play Richards over Anderson. Not only was that performance versus Burnley terrible, yes, of course, the difference now is that they're playing at home instead of away, and actually all of Fulham's clean sheets this season, I think, have been sort of attained at home. But Nottingham Forest actually looked like a pretty decent team. I was very unimpressed still with the away performance versus Burnley. I don't think playing away is an excuse to sort of concede 2.5 XG versus Burnley. And to be honest, the numbers from Fulham as of late just have not been impressive at all. Ironically, City actually still had, I think, similar XG that sort of Burnley accumulated. So it's probably one of Fulham's worst performances this season from a defensive standpoint, but they're only going to get worse, as I said, with some of the AFCON transfers out from their own team. Whereas actually Crystal Palace are not going to be that impacted from a defensive point of view. And I really still like the performance versus City. And I want to back a double outcome, which increases the ceiling of my team within an individual game week, as opposed to, let's say, increasing the floor by, I guess, hedging between Anderson and Lacroix. I want to do Richards plus Lacroix and also Hincapié plus Raya. So I plan to roll here. In Game Week 18, I think I've got a lot of options, right? Because Semenyo could be a hold. He could also be a sell. If Sobo is fine, then I only really have an option to move Semenyo out. The question I'll probably be asking myself here is, what do I want to do with Hincapié? What do I want to do with Semenyo? If, let's say, Michael Keane seems good to go for Everton's fixture run and Branthwaite is not going to come back until, let's say, end of January, then that timeline really fits just going for a Michael Keane transfer. And this way I can actually get enough money to go for Matheus Cunha as well, who I think would be probably my favorite midfielder pick to go with. In fact, he actually has the sort of highest predicted points from the AI on a 4-game week basis from Game Week 18. So Cunha makes a lot of sense because we're still kind of in the phase here in FPL of making short-term transfers. And if I make this transfer, then we have a very, very strong team this game week. Yes, regrettably, I guess I have to bench Richards versus Tottenham, and Tottenham aren't particularly good. But this is the advantage of having Sobo for Game Week 18. It just raises the team's ceiling here for this week. And once again, it just comes down to whether Sobo is fit, and we'll have to just reevaluate. I have two great options on the bench, but with West Ham playing a little bit better as of late and Fulham playing worse, Crystal Palace actually generally looking good, but Everton still being a really competent defense and them being versus Burnley, I think I'll take my chances here with someone like Michael Keane. The alternatives to someone like Keane, I think, from a defensive standpoint, could be options like maybe Dallo, because Dallo would actually give me the chance to still play double Palace, and actually I can bank on, let's say, United's fixture run after that, right? So this would be kind of a pre-transfer, but Dallo's actually quite cheap, and I think he's going to be nailed over this period compared to, let's say, someone like Dorgu, who's been really, really poor. And alternative picks maybe also could still be, for example, Malik Thiaw. Malik Thiaw gives me enough money to actually still go into, a move like Semenyo to Cunha. So that's something to consider as well. Tarkowski is a little bit out of my price range if I want to go for Cunha, but I don't necessarily need to go for Cunha, right? So I think the alternative options to Cunha would still be someone like maybe a Shade within the midfield. He's the only other pick that I think from a Game Week 18 standpoint where you could probably still say they actually have some pretty good fixtures anyways. Like if you look at Brentford's fixture run, this includes the Bournemouth at home game, the Tottenham at home game, Everton away, and then still Sunderland at home. And then you can obviously sell your, let's say, Brentford players after that, right? I've been using short-term transfers for the midfielders, but I think that's okay. If I'm only using 2 free transfers in Game Week 18, I've got 2 out of 4 of my free transfers here. I would roll the other 2, and then by Game Week 19, I've got 3 free transfers again. So I feel like there's not much to be worried about here from a utilization of transfer standpoint. The rest of the team is still very much robust, and until, let's say, Palmer's fully fit, or Saka and Foden's minutes go down the drain, I don't think there needs to be midfield transfers. The question mark is around Sobo. So that's kind of how I feel like I'm going to play my team. And after Game Week 18, as I said, I don't really plan transfers from Game Week 18 onwards to 19. So let's say if I keep this team intact, the main thing here is, as I said, I can probably enjoy Michael Keane, even including the Wolves at home game. And then in Game Week 22, this is probably where the question mark is going to be, what happens to Branthwaite? Is he back within the game? Because I'm likely to miss Game Week 23 with Michael Keane, and we might have to just reconsider moves. But that's too far into the future. I don't really want to consider that. Even the idea of going for Keane just really depends on what my options are, what the information we have is from David Moyes. Maybe even, let's say, as soon as next game week when I have to make a decision ahead of a schedule. So let's go back to maybe recontextualizing what would happen if Sobo is out. I think if Sobo's out, I might be aggressive this week. There is an opportunity for that. Or I can just roll and play double Palace defense as I intended to. And then in Game Week 18, I can make 2 free transfers again. So I feel like there is an opportunity to maybe go Sobo and maybe also take Semenyo out. It really depends, right? So if I think Sobo's maybe going to come back for, let's say, Leeds at home, I could keep him. And maybe I just go out of Semenyo. I go into Shade from Semenyo, and then I also maybe even have the opportunity to upgrade Hincapié. Say if Gabriel's coming back, but I can't afford Gabriel in this context, Calafiori should still be someone that I can buy. Calafiori is still dropping in price. So I have the opportunity to move, let's say, someone who might not be nailed in the medium to long term in Hincapié, but actually move into someone that I think I'd feel generally quite comfortable with, like Calafiori. And of course, if I don't like Arsenal defense, The simple sort of nailed option for the long term is always going to be Tarkowski, because I think the benefit of Tarkowski versus Keane is if Brandwaite comes back, as I said, around game week 21, 22, 23, that does completely ruin the purpose of that Michael Keane transfer. So that is something that I'm heavily having to consider, within my own team and with the defensive transfer that I make in this position. The only thing I don't like, as I said, is this kind of closes me off from that sort of Man United fixture run. So it's not exactly a transfer here that really I like that much, because I do think United's attack is better than Brentford's, or that even Cunha maybe is a better attacker than Xhaka. Let's see, because we would still have one more game week of information. Let's see how Brentford play without Dango in game week 17. Let's see how Man United play without Mbumo and Ahmad in game week 17. So to me, I'm sort of in between Xhaka and Cunha from a game week 18 midfielder sort of purchase point of view. The other options within the game would still be, players like Palmer, who I can't touch, Bruno G, who I don't really love now that he's so expensive. Doku has just sort of recently been injured, and some of the other picks aren't that interesting. Maybe Kudus could be the one, but Tottenham are still pretty awful. So I kind of like Xhaka just from a fixture point of view. Yeah, that's kind of how I feel about the game. We might have to reconsider options like Neto and Rodgers, who've been doing really well. But for now, as I said, I kind of like Xhaka. I kind of like Cunha. So that's kind of what I'm thinking about at this moment in time. So that's kind of what I'm thinking about with my transfer plans. I do think, as I said, it is around Sobo information. I personally think, because the strong defense that I have for all of these weeks, like the key thing to look at is on game week 17, playing double defense is not really going to hurt me. On game week 18, even if I have Sobo benched here, if I play, let's say, Richards over Anderson, this actually still looks like a really strong team, this 4-4-2. So I don't think I've put myself in a position where I am forced to use free transfers in game week 18 too much. And even this Hincapié move doesn't need to be done, because Hincapié might even on paper still have an equivalent sort of clean sheet percentage compared to, let's say, a Tarkowski, simply because Arsenal are a different quality of defense. And I might want to keep Hincapié because the Gabriel timeline is such that maybe he comes back middle of January or later of January. But it seems like the latest news is that Gabriel is progressing quite fine, and that he might sort of come back to team training in Christmas. That still seems early compared to, let's say, David Ornstein's initial reporting, but we just have to monitor the situation. So for me, as I said, some question marks on Hincapié, but I don't have to adjust them until game week 18. Might not even have to adjust them until much later. As far as, let's say, Semenyo, I think he's a good hold for game week 18. So that's why I went for him as a move. And then Sobo, I would love Wolves at home. I would love Leeds at home, especially, any sort of 20, 30, 40 minutes of being a penalty taker or a full-on set-piece taker of the team. But let's just see what happens. And that's going to be my transfer plans for now. Thank you guys so much for watching. I'll see you guys soon. Take care and goodbye.